brilliant place and what a brilliant set of people to be talking to, so thank you for having me. As I was very well introduced, thank you. My name's Ian Miller. I do work for, right mouthful, the Greater Manchester Archaeological Advisory Service, which effectively I'm the county archaeologist for Greater Manchester. But it's not a position I've held for very long. I don't know, 8 months or something. And prior to that, I was a dirt archaeologist. I've done dirt archaeology for longer than I care to remember, I suppose, 1980s, mainly in the northwest. And I've never worked anywhere more exciting than your fair town. I think that's fair to say. I'm a bit obsessed with Wigan because I think you've got a great history and you've got some great archaeology. It's just a matter of finding it. And I will say, actually, it's brilliant to see that your group's formed as well. Because I know we have the Wigan, the very well established and esteemed Wigan Archaeological Society, but it's Great Northern History Society as well. We're all on the same side, historic environment, it's what we like. So yeah, that's me. In my kind of former past as a dirt archaeologist, I did have the great pleasure of opening a massive big hole in the centre of your fair town before they built that monstrosity called the Grand Arcade. And I can't believe it's 17 years ago, but yeah, it is. Well, nearly anyway, it's only 16 and a bit. Still a while ago, I guess. And this is basically what tonight's presentation is based on. So, I've got to be honest, it's not cutting edge, fresh research. Some of you might have heard some of this before, hopefully some of you won't. But I'd like to think it's such a good story, it's worth hearing more than once maybe. Enough introduction, I think. Was Wigan Coccium? That's actually a much better title than I've given. So let's scrub that. This is, was Wigan Coccium? Well, what do we mean by Coccium? Moving down.
Are you sure?
Yes. Where does Coccium come from? Well, it's actually drawn from a Roman manuscript, one of the very few Roman manuscripts that does survive. And I say manuscript, it's really a road atlas. And it's known as the Antonine Itinerary, which we think was put together in the very early 3rd century. And it's an incredible document because it maps out all the main Roman thoroughfares across the empire, not only Britain, but the main thoroughfares, and identifies in Latin, which is a bit of a problem, the main settlements along those routes. So the one that's of particular interest to us is Route 10 or Iterex, which travelled, 150 Roman miles from Ravenglass up on the Cumbrian coast right down to Whitchurch in Shropshire. And what the itinerary tells us about the route, it just names these 7 intermediary settlements, forts or Roman stations en route, and it gives them the Latin names. We don't know where they are because they're in Latin. Having said that, we're very, very, very certain about 2 of them. In particular, we know about, I'll just move down one. Maybe. Yeah. Okay, we know about Ribchester because we've had the pleasure of Ribchester of digging up inscriptions that says welcome to, I'm not going to try and pronounce the Latin, but welcome to Ribchester in Latin. And we also know about, we certainly know about Whitchurch and we know about Ravenglass. But there's this settlement in the middle called Coccium, and this has been the focus of debate for literally a couple of centuries, and various people have argued about the true location. Well, where is Coccium? One of the earliest antiquarians who scoured the country noting archaeological remains, etc., a guy called Whitaker, working in the mid-18th century, he identified Blackrod. He says, no, Blackrod, it's got to be Coccium, it's on the route. You draw a line along this route, it's going to be Blackrod. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Blackrod, it's quite an interesting place. What's particularly interesting about Blackrod is it's on this hill, small hill, and it's a really commanding position. I must admit, if I was in the Roman military, I'd probably look at that because it gives you a really good commanding view across the surrounding area. It would be a really good place to put a military establishment. The only problem with Blackrod, actually having been Coccium, is that there hasn't been a shred of any physical evidence for the Romans having been there. Got the Roman pottery, etc., nothing's been found. So, could do with a little bit of firm evidence really before we point to Coccium. It was over 100 years later that the esteemed antiquarian, Watkin, actually came down to Wigan and said, you know what, Wigan has to be Coccium. It's the obvious location. Strategically, it's a really important place. Why? Because it's a crossing point of the River Douglas. And this is something that upsets me a little bit, just in the modern landscape generally, is that we've lost our rivers. We seem to have lost our rivers. I think the Douglas, forgive me for saying so, but I think the Douglas is quite a good example. You don't really notice it in the town, do you, flowing through? It's a little bit hidden. We see this in Manchester with the River Medlock. One of the most important rivers in Manchester. Try and find it, and you've got a real effort on your hands because it's just hemmed in with big buildings or covered over so people can build over the top. But in the 2nd century, or the 3rd century AD, it would have been a major feature in the landscape. And crossing it, certainly for an army, will have been a challenge. And it does make it a strategic point, a crossing point of that river. So that's quite interesting. The other really nice thing about Wigan is if we look on a map, which we have here of the main Roman settlements in the northwest, Wigan is effectively halfway between the known major Roman settlement at Wilderspool, or Warrington, and the other major settlement at Walton-le-Dale. We're halfway. And that is actually quite important because the Roman military were walking everywhere and they're going to want to stop somewhere halfway. So in that respect, it is quite an obvious location, it's Wigan. But that didn't stop other researchers proposing other places. And as recently as 1981, there was a case put forward for Edgeworth having been Coccium. Was anyone from Edgeworth? From rude about the place? No, it's a lovely place, Edgeworth, but it ain't Coccium, we can be certain of that. And then more recently, 2001, someone called Waddy put together actually quite a good argument for the focus of the Roman Coccium actually having been at Standish. And there is a little bit of evidence for that, some of which you can argue, but at the end of the day, until 2005, no one could be certain, and this argument carried on being debated. Okay, so if you do look at a map of any published maps of the Roman Northwest, Wigan does often feature, but it's usually with a question mark because people don't know what it is. Whereas on most of these we have fort, big square triangle, we know there's a fort there, we found it. Or in the case of Chester, a legionary fortress, no question, we know about that. And then we have these triangles which are just kind of industrial sites. That basically means we don't know what it is, but the Romans had a major presence here. Walton-le-Dale's in that bracket. We had an excavation, well, there's been several excavations there in the 1990s. And yeah, Walton's an incredible place really. It just seemed like they were throwing Roman pottery around with gay abandon, there was so much of it, and definitely massive big buildings all over the place, but no evidence of a fort. And we still don't know what they were doing there. And until the Grand Arcade came up, the same could be said about Wigan. Little bits have been found, but we don't know what they're doing. Why were they here? So that's really what I want to put a bit of flesh on this evening. So what is the case? Apart from Watkin and this strategic location, what else do we know about the area? Well, there have been a number of interesting Roman discoveries. These are mainly find spots that have really been found by chance through the 18th, particularly through the 19th century. Most of them have been coin hoards or even isolated coins, bits of pottery. The red dots, I mean, it's a little bit out of date to be honest, but red dots sort of marking out sort of finds distribution where people just come across chance finds. This isn't archaeology, this is people just finding chance things during development. And you can see there's this real concentration of red spots or Roman find spots right in Wigan town centre. If I blew that up, we would see that those spots are mainly along King Street and Millgate, right in the heart of the town, which does give a bit of a suggestion that that was the focus of some sort of Roman activity, whatever it was. The Romans had been there and had been dropping stuff, in this case coins. Just to support what the body loves argument, there's also a number of fine spots around Standish and Upper Boar's Head. Those are all coin hoards, and some quite spectacular coin hoards to be honest. We're talking several hundreds of Roman coins in a single cache. I think the ones at Boar's Head were, Bill will know better than me, he will correct me I'm sure, but 1920s I think one of those.
26.
And what, sorry?
1926.
26. Now I'm scared. There's somebody who really knows. But yeah, coin hoards. Look, coin hoards don't necessarily pinpoint where people were actually living. Because if we go back to the 3rd century when a lot of these hoards were made, I mean, when I talk about hoard, basically what I'm talking about is a sack of coins that somebody's buried in the ground to hide it. They didn't have banks, they didn't have anywhere secure to keep these things, and certainly the 3rd century going to the 4th century, it was troubled times and people were not secure. What do you do with your valuables? You bury them, and you do not bury them in areas of main population where somebody's going to find it. So to my mind, it would be fair to say that where you're finding hoards, you're probably some distance from any sort of settlement. So it does kind of make sense for this to be on the periphery of a Roman town. Maybe I'm making this up a little bit, I just want Wigan to be of Roman origin. Need something a little bit more firm than this. And I think this is what we got. Well, we certainly got that opportunity to do. All right, okay, so yeah, I have blown up the red spots. These are the finds that have been found in antiquity around Wigan town centre. Yeah, the red dots and the red triangles, the dots of coins, triangles and pottery, and a few burials as well actually, down near where the old gasworks was. But you can see this real concentration of finds, really on the high ground I guess, as you go up Millgate. And again, that's something that isn't necessarily all that obvious in the modern townscape perhaps. But Millgate is actually quite a steep hill. You know, you do get a quite good vista from there, or at least you would have done before they built monstrosities like the Grand Arcade. And you would have had this great vista right across the River Douglas and that really important crossing point and ford. Yes. Amongst these finds are some really special ones. In particular, there's this one gold coin that was found on the edge of Mains Park a very long time ago, isolated find spot, but it's very rare to find these gold coins. But this is a particularly nice one because it features an emperor that was in power for just 1 year, which provides a really good date. And what I find really interesting is that date is AD 69, which is quite a magical date in some respects, because that corresponds really with the initial push of the Roman military northwards. And they started coming up into the northwest and establishing their forts across the region. Now, there is a school of thought that says the Roman incursion in the northwest was actually a little bit later than that. And we were just talking a matter of 10 years. And when, in the grand scheme of things, we're talking about 2,000 years ago, what does 10 years in that matter? But it does make a big difference, because it comes down to the governors in charge. So, whilst it's unlikely that coin was dropped in AD 69, it might have been in someone's possession for 10, 15, 20 years, so you can't have too much store by it. But nevertheless, it does point to a mid-1st century presence in Wigan of Roman military, and it will have been the military that had access to coins like that. So that's a nice one. Another really enigmatic, I suppose, is the best word. Artifact is not really a find, but an artifact that is still in Wigan. Is this thing shown down in the bottom right, which is actually built into the wall of the parish church. It's a big stone, and it really looks like it could be a Roman inscribed stone. It's impossible to read, it's not fully exposed, and nobody's going to be removing it to have a good look. It's well and truly embedded in the fabric of the late medieval church. But it has been suggested, and I think there's some grounds actually, that it is reused. Just found lying around and was originated from the Roman occupation of the town, quite possibly. So really, just looking at that, and this is really the evidence we were faced with in 2005, say, this is kind of our evidence for Roman Wigan, based on a few isolated finds, but nevertheless, there's so many of them, such a concentration, there is something going on in the town. Okay, no questions so far?
Yeah.
Oh.
Coins.
Oh.
Gold coins found, I'm not found AD 69. How long would a coin be current? Would a gold coin be valued at the weight of the gold, like it probably is nowadays? Could a gold coin from AD 69 still be in circulation in AD 150?
Yes, I would imagine so, yes. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. I'm sure there are some new mathematicists about who would shoot me down, but yes, as far as I'm aware. Certainly with the 1st century one, because it was full gold content, and same with the silver coins, had a high silver content. The later ones, when you get into the 3rd century and the 4th century, they were hideously debased. So the actual content of precious, silver basically, was very, very, very low. Just like today's money really, so it wasn't worth quite as much. There might be a question about those, but gold's always kept its value, as it does today. It always has done.
So it may not have pointed to it being lost. It could be any time, say for the next 100 years.
Yes, but I'm still using it for really good evidence, well not really good evidence, but some sort of indication of early occupation. But you are right, it could have been in circulation for a while, yeah. Yeah, absolutely, it could. So what we really need is to dig up the ground, and that's vast amounts of what I call physical, hard evidence for Roman presence is what you really need. You know, you've got to have this as proper evidence. That's why we do archaeology. That's why archaeology is important, I think. Yeah. But this is a central sort of contextual background, if you like. Okay, so archaeology, I suppose, is, notwithstanding the work that Whitaker did, wandering around looking at things, and that Watkin did, wandering around looking at things, the first kind of real piece of modern archaeological work where somebody digs a proper hole quite carefully to examine the sequence of layers that have been built up there. The first piece of work that was done in Wigan comes back to the early 1980s, and that was focused on the Weald. It was a really interesting time, the early 80s. This is really when we really started doing archaeology across what's now Greater Manchester, and all the big towns were targeted to do just a little bit of work. It was quite small scale work to start with, but it produced some really interesting and really useful information that we're able to build on later. And the work that was done in Wigan was probably the most important of all the work that was done around the various main towns at that time. So this is what the Weald looked like in the 80s. and this white triangle, so you don't see very easily, but that is effectively where the digging was done. And this was before the children's library went up on Millgate. So do you know what we're talking about? So that started off in 1982, and the first trenches were opened up inside buildings that were to be demolished before they built the new library. And yeah, classic photograph actually, and this is why I love Wigan. This is what we call deeply stratified remains, which is great. Going right down to the natural ground where you see various holes have been dug into it. And those holes are either medieval or Roman. Well, there's a mixture of both there, where people have cut big pits or cut foundations for buildings, etc. And we can still find them, we still uncover them. But as the years pass and the centuries passed, you get this soil build-up over the top of them that seals it. And the job of an archaeologist is to take off those layers in the reverse order that they were laid down and record them as they go. And if you're lucky, you will get material out of each and every different layer, so you can date it and provide a full sequence from the 21st century right the way down into the virgin ground. That tells you the story and how the sites come together. So that's what they did at the Weed. And these early trenches show pretty conclusively that Romans had been here. We've got some pits that were filled full of Roman pottery and nothing later, so it had to be Roman. And just the way that they laid in what I would call the stratigraphic sequence, and that's the way that the layers are built up over the top of it, very clearly of Roman origin. In 1984, immediately before they built the Children's Library, and buildings had been demolished, that gave opportunity for another piece of work, which is this slide you can see in the bottom right. So Millgate is just off the slide there in the front. Opened up a bigger area, and yeah, loads of what we call features, these big pits, these post holes that supported timber uprights for buildings, etc., etc. That were clearly of Roman and medieval origin. We are finding definite stuff here. One thing in particular they found were a lot of these what are called halves. They're very, very distinctive things. They're like bright orange clay, which has been subject to really high temperature. These are where they will have been, I suppose the best analogy is like a blacksmith's hearth, if you like. Got up to really high temperature, people have been making stuff. But associated with these were bits of iron waste, iron slag, smithing slag. So the implication is that there's 4 or 5 of these things that the Romans have been working with metal here. And on the back of that, like I said before, if you look in a book that's published in, well, since between 1980 and 2000, it was marked Wigan as this manufacturing stroke industrial site. That's why they say it, because they found these hearths, but didn't find anything else really definitive. Remains of a few buildings maybe, but didn't really know what they were. Just these hearths. So the idea was that there was lots of ironwork going on here, and this will have been this big industrial centre for supplying the Roman army. That might have been the case, but it doesn't really make sense in isolation, because any sort of industrial centre that the Romans had set up would have been protected, certainly in the northwest, by a military station or a military fort. And that was the big thing that was missing from the Weed. Where's the fort? I mean, these things are huge. They were built to house 500 soldiers. You don't lose them easily. Surrounded by big ditches, but didn't find it. Hence the big question mark over what really was the rationale behind having a settlement at Wigan. So, a couple of plans. As archaeologists, we dig stuff up, or we draw it as we go. We put together all these plans. Why I've put this up is to show that one of the trenches was actually chocker with Roman and medieval, these features, these big pits, these post holes, etc. Whereas some of the other trenches were quite blank, It's not because they were too lazy to draw it, it's because everything had been wiped out in the 19th century. And that is one of the big challenges in the Northwest, is the area was so heavily developed in the 19th century with industrialisation. People are building big mills, loads and loads of houses, often with cellars. And when you create a cellar, obviously you dig down, dig out the earth, dig out the archaeology and throw it away. We lose it, it's gone. So it can be quite challenging in the Northwest, northwestern towns that is, because a lot of the stuff has gone and you're often just looking at little islands of intact, and I'll use that word again, stratigraphy that do survive. And that's really what we saw at the Weald. Quite a few blank trenches, but one or two islands where we have, you know, really good evidence for Roman remains. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So moving on. That was the 1980s. We got a bit of a story together, and then, ooh, wrong way. Nothing else really happened after that until 2005. And that's when the application went in to build the Grand Arcade. Sorry, I should have said before, keep seeing these horrible red lines on some of these maps. That is what I call the boundary, the red line boundary, or the edge of the development for the Grand Arcade. So that's where it lies on Mather's map of 1820, 1827. And that's, yeah, the footprint of the Grand Arcade on modern mappings. So this was a really, really, really exciting opportunity to have a really good look, really for the first time, at a big area right in the heart of the medieval town, the historic core of the town, well, alongside Millgate. We all know where the Grand Arcade is. Standard approach to archaeology. Is it worth me touching on that? Yeah. Okay, so how do we approach archaeological sites these days? Well, the first thing we do is when a planning application goes in to build something, those applications are normally supported with something called an archaeological assessment. And the purpose of that is for somebody to go through all the records, everything we know historically and archaeological records about that site that's going to be developed, to make an informed decision as to whether there might be any archaeology there or not. It's a really important stage in the planning process. And that is usually, or it should be done, before any decision is made as to whether to allow this development or not. So, an assessment was done for this site, and basically it said, well, you know, there's work done in the 1980s, there's all this antiquarian work, there's all these fine spots. We think that Wigan may well have been an important Roman settlement, but we don't know where it was exactly, and we don't know exactly what it was. So there is a chance, a good chance, of finding some Roman and some medieval remains, but we can't say what they're going to be or exactly where they might be. And that's all you can expect really from desk-based work. You can't expect anything definitive. The only way to find out for certain is to stuff a big hole into the ground. And that's what we like doing, that's what we do best. But rather than roll in there and open up a massive swathe of ground, we can't do that straight away because there's always a cost to this and somebody's paying for it. So we have to justify our actions, as it were, and take it step by step. So, having established that it's definitely worth having a look to see if there's any archaeology, the next stage is to go and do just that, but on a small scale. And what we tend to do is do things called evaluation trenches, which is just that. Dig a series of trenches to evaluate what's down there. We don't expect the archaeology all the way across that site by any means, but we would hope that there would be some archaeology surviving in certain places across the site. So the idea is to dig some trenches wherever we can, and where we find some archaeology, then we can go to a second stage and open up a bigger area and really record all the archaeology before it's lost to development. Okay? So, what we have on the left is Grand Arcade footprint in grey. A load of red trenches. Those were our initial trenches. And it seemed a bit random, but they were quite carefully targeted, either on the footprints of buildings shown on historic maps. It's not only the Romans we're interested in, it's the history of Wigan we're interested in. So that includes anything medieval, anything post-medieval, even 19th century. You know, the 19th century was a really important period in Wigan's history. There's buildings that are no longer there, there's industries that went on. You want to know about it. So again, you know, it comes within the remit of archaeology to look at that. So some of those trenches were placed on those areas. Some areas we knew had been wiped out completely, i.e. the full top part of the site, just due to late 19th century and 20th century whole-scale development. There's no point looking. We're just going to find 20th century backfill. So these were the areas marked in red where we thought there was a chance of finding some stuff. Just to put it into sort of context, as it were, the areas in purple, that's where the excavation areas that were dug in the Weed in the 1980s. So we're very close. We know we are very close to where there should be a lot of Roman stuff. Had Wigan been Coccium, that is, of course. And we didn't know at this stage. Okay, so evaluation trenches. Always a treat. Get the hang of this eventually. The first area we went to was Shipyard. Do you all know what a shipyard is? Or I'll go back up one. Shipyard is by the ship pub on Millgate, down the back.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. At one time it was Yates's Wine Lodge, I think, wasn't it, out the back? It just finished being Yates's Wine Lodge when we got there, actually. And we were in what was called the Beer Garden. Sounded attractive, but it wasn't. No, not good at all, really. That was only a small part of it. Bad Google Earth image from 2000, but I want to show something before it was developed. This is all under the Grand Arcade now. So yeah, we've got the ship in on one of the big yards at the back. And just looking on the sequence of historic maps, that had never seemed to have been built on, as far as we can tell. I mean, the earliest map really is the 1820s, but after that, it's always been a yard. So if it hasn't been developed, then there's a good chance that any old stuff might actually survive underground without having been disturbed so much. So yeah, that was the first place we targeted, just for a trench, just an initial evaluation trench. And yeah, it turned out quite promising. This one on the photograph on the right is, I really quite like that, because that just shows what we do as archaeologists in some respects. So you'll be able to see this orange material. That's what we call the virgin ground, natural geology, clay, not touched, been there for thousands of years since last glaciation, not really of any interest. But you can see this sort of dark grey streak across it. That is a man-made feature. That's exactly what we're looking at. And as archaeologists, that's what it depends on. Just looking at different colours in the soil, different textures, how it feels. Because it can show you where that bit of ground has been messed about with and then filled back up with a different sort of material. But it certainly shows there is something there, what we would call a feature, a big linear feature in this case. Could be a ditch, could be a big pit, we don't know. And to be honest, at evaluation stage, we don't really need to know too much more. What we've established here is there is almost certainly archaeology. We did dig a sneaky hole and we pulled out some medieval pottery. So we can go away and say, well, this could well be medieval. We don't know for certain, but it is worth opening up a bigger trench and having a good look at it. It's certainly worth it. So that's effectively what we did there. We left that trench, so no, we need to come back, do some more. Move on, do some more trenches, which we did. Quite a lot of the other trenches, to be honest, were a little bit blank. They had been heavily disturbed in the 19th and 20th centuries. and getting a bit sad about this really, because we were desperate to find something, if I'm honest, because it had to be here, it had to be here, it's just a matter of finding it. So we worked our way across the side, trenches all over the place, not finding very much at all actually. And then we got to what was called Powell's Yard, which is just right underneath the Grand Arcade now. But next to the council buildings, just south of the council buildings. Big yard area around the back. Again, looking at the sequence of historic maps, a lot of that area appear to have been yards in the 18th and 19th centuries. So the chances are anything underneath might not have been disturbed. So we were quite excited really with that one. Dug some trenches. Development is well ongoing by that stage. It's quite ridiculous really trying to work whilst they're ripping down multi-storey car park next door. But that's modern archaeology for you, I guess. Okay, on Powell's Yard we did find a few things. Not as much as I'd hoped. There were some slight things, you might be able to see a slightly darker patch of material there, just cut into that natural geology. Really hard to say what it might be, other than it's probably old, it's probably worth a look at. And then one of the trenches, got quite excited by this, was this feature here. Well, you can see the bright orange clay, very, very, very clearly hardened, fired clay. Now that looks just like one of these hearts, one of these smithing hearts, just like we found at the Weeds. And then, joy of joys, in the middle we had one tiny little small fragment of Roman pottery come out in the middle. And it was just on the back of that, to be honest, that one fragment of pottery, we said, oh, this is really important. This is big area, I'm afraid. We need to look at this. And I've got to be honest, it was a punt. It was a punt. And you can see the developer looking quite cross, you know. How much is this going to cost? A lot. But so be it, I'm afraid. So be it. We're convinced there's something here. So after a bit of arguing, it was agreed that we could open up two areas. One at Shipyard and quite a big cheeky area down on Powell's Yard. And that is quite a big area actually, based on one fragment of pottery. But you know, it had to be done. It had to be done. Yeah, I do quite like that aerial photograph actually. That's taken during the construction programme, and archaeology does work like this sometimes because developers are paying for this. So in some respects, whilst they have to do it because it's a requirement of their planning permission, they can do it kind of when they want. Now, the more informed developers will appreciate that archaeology is, using their words, a risk. And it is a risk, because you never know what is in the ground. We can't tell them what's in there. We can say there's a good chance something might be in there, but it's very, very, very rare you will catch an archaeology say, using the word definitely. We don't do that. We say possibly quite a lot. If you're lucky, you might get a probably out of us, but definitely. How long is it going to take? 6 weeks, possibly. Might be a bit quicker, don't know. These guys didn't really take that on board, and they didn't deal with the archaeology up front quick enough. A lot of developers, the more enlightened ones, would deal with archaeology before they brought on big machines and crack on with their development. These guys didn't. So we did end up working alongside the construction work, as it were. So they're developing areas down here, areas in the middle, whilst we're trying to clear the archaeology in the middle. And they're banking on the fact we're going to get rid of this really quick. We don't know what's in the ground. We don't know what the weather's going to do. It might be cold, it might be frozen. Shipyard, first day of the excavation. Oh great, no, that's going to slow things down for a starter. So yes, back to Shipyard, January 2005, it snowed quite a lot. But that's just one of the hazards of doing archaeology in winter. But the snow melts, snow goes away, and you can clean up the site. And it wasn't a big site, but there was enough there to get us excited. And this is classic archaeological photo, I think. You can see the nice natural virgin ground in the orange, and then these big streaks of darker stuff, which is the archaeology, or at least sometimes the archaeology. The one in the middle looks similar. That's a 20th century service trench for electric. You know, same principle. Somebody's dug a big hole through the natural and filled it with different material. But the other two on either side, slightly grey material, that was proper archaeology. Didn't necessarily know at that stage, but our next stage is to excavate them out. What wasn't so obvious on the previous slide is that this linear thing here actually continued. So I marked it out on red, and hopefully you'll just believe me, because it did continue, but you can't actually see it on that slide. But it was there, I promise. These other two, really obvious, I think. So when we excavated those out, yeah, absolutely proper features. And what they transpired to be were these ditches, long ditches. And without getting too anorak about it, we're very keen as archaeologists looking at the profile of ditches, because sometimes it can tell you quite a lot. This one in particular, you'll be able to see it's a real V-shaped profile to it. Actually, I've got an image to show this. Here we go. Really nice V-shaped ditch. That is classic Roman military defensive ditch. Well, the classic ones actually have something at the bottom, a little square slot at the bottom, which is called an ankle breaker, which does just as it says in the tin. You fall on it and yeah, your ankle goes. But it's good indication of Roman military fortification, which we get really excited by. Okay, it's one small fragment of a ditch, but it's got Roman pot in it, nothing else. It's definitely Roman, and it looks tantalisingly like Roman military. Could this be the long lost missing fort? Too early to say with one fort, with one ditch. The second ditch, very, very, very different profile altogether. It's big flat bottom, very different sort of thing. But again, you do get Roman ditches like that. And this also had good Roman finds in it. A few bits of Roman pottery. I'm not talking sackfuls, I'm just talking a few. But nevertheless, that's all we got out of it, just Roman, which is a good sign of it actually being of Roman origin. The best thing we got out of it actually, which is quite remarkable, I haven't seen anything like this back at Winchester, were these wooden objects, and 4 of those. Incredible how they survive. Any guesses what they might be? Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Oh, does it? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, Roman tent pegs, definitely Roman, almost certainly tent pegs. I think the shape says it all. What are we doing with tent pegs? Well, the theory we came out with at the time, it was just a theory, is that could we be looking at a marching camp? What do we mean by a marching camp? Well, when the Roman military first moved north, they will have a plan, they will know where they want to build a military station, a Roman fort. A Roman fort is going to take a little while to build. You've got a load of buildings to build, you've got big defensive ditches to dig around the outside. Okay, you've got a big crew of the military personnel on the job, but it's still going to take a while. Whilst they're doing it, they will be billeted in a marching camp. It's effectively a small-scale temporary fort where all the occupants live in tents. Each tent will need a load of tent pegs. So I don't think it was too unrealistic to suggest that this might have been a marching camp. It's possible. The other thing we got out of that ditch were several fragments of a Roman pot. Not just any old Roman pot, but a Roman pot that was firmly dated to the 1st century AD, which again, coming back to that gold coin of 69, this does tie in with that initial move of the Roman military into the northwest. And that again might tie into the marching camp theory. It's early. It's very much sort of primary occupation, if you like, of the Roman town. So we got excited, but at the end of the day, I've got one small fragment of 2 ditches that are about 10 metres long. It's not really quite enough to say, we found Coccium! Well, actually, you found a ditch and maybe some happy Roman campers. But anyway, a good sign and a good result. So, moving on to the bigger area, Powell's Yard, that you probably recognise Pennington's building. The rest of the landscape looks a little bit different these days. Looks brutal, but that's how we do archaeology. You think of trowels, we do use trowels, but trowels generally weigh 20 tonnes these days. But operated correctly, these guys can take off 2 centimetres at a time if you get a decent machine driver, and they are crucial. And we need that. We need that to take off the modern overburden. We can't do that by hand. We're talking hundreds of tonnes of rubble to a depth of, I don't know, up to a metre maybe, that is sealing, overlying all the stuff that we need to look at. You have to use machines, otherwise we'd still be there otherwise, you know. So yes, it looks brutal, but careful control, carefully watching, you take off this modern stuff, get down to the archaeology, and then flip to the good old-fashioned, traditional, hand-powered, 4-inch point-in trowel. And stuff started coming up straight away, which is great. So we got really odd ditches, really deep, stuff full of Roman parts. Here we go. Excellent. And archaeologists where they are best, in holes, heads down, digging out stuff. A lot of holes there, a lot of big pits, a lot of rubbish pits. A lot of those are actually medieval. And again, that is something I really want to highlight. Wigan was such an important medieval town, let alone Romans. Medieval archaeology is really important in Wigan. It's just as important as the Roman stuff. But that's just a little side rant, I'm afraid. Back to Romans. That was Roman, certainly. I don't know which is which on here. Some of those are medieval, some are Roman. Really, the only way you can tell when you get to that level is by the material you're pulling out. Where you've got a pit that's just full of Roman pot and nothing else, it's a fair bet that it's going to be Roman. You know? We can use carbon dating if we find a piece of charcoal that's big enough, and we will do that where we can, but it's not always possible. Bottom line is, a lot of features there, some really good stuff going on, which looks really quite promising. Very difficult to offer an explanation for the depth of this sort of ditch though. It's not a defensive ditch, it's not a boundary ditch. Don't really know what it is, but it's certainly Roman and it's certainly quite big. So keep digging, see what else we can find. I'll never forget the day actually when this happened. I didn't spend much time on site. I'm going on like I was there every day. I wasn't. I was in the office getting shouted at by the developer. But speaking very frequently to the guy who's actually running the site, really experienced and very good archaeologist called Mark Bagwell. And it was quite a stretch for him. He was going out of Wigan every day, coming out of Wigan every day from Lancaster. He was working long hours, it was hard work, etc. He'd been there a couple of months. He rang me up and said, I think I found a hypercourse. Oh God, he's lost it. What am I going to do? He's lost it. There's no way to know a hypercourse. Worked him too hard. Going to have to send him on holiday. And he sent me these photos that, they actually do look like Roman tiles, which you would expect to see in a hypercourse. But I don't believe it. And then he sent me another photograph unearthing this really nice piece of worked stone that I've got a better photograph of it a bit, but it's basically the base of a column, which again came out of a Roman pit. So actually, maybe Mark hasn't lost it at all. Maybe we have found something rather special here. So keep digging. It's always the way, and then sure enough, we start getting stacks of what we call hypercoarse peli. I'll explain that in a bit if you're not sure what they are. But basically stacks of Roman tiles, and what they're doing is supporting a suspended floor, and they are undoubtedly of Roman date. That seals it. We have found something really special. And then we start finding actual stone-built walls of a massive building. I mean, there's no scale on that, but that's effectively almost just over a metre across. That is a big wall, and it's built of stone. It's something substantial, it's something really special. For the most part, just as you might expect, any stone building that was lying around abandoned was utilised by later people in Wigan as a great source of building material. Need some stone? Go and rob it off the old ruins down the road. That's what people did. Not only Wigan, do it everywhere. So what we have here is what I would call a robber trench. And we can see it, you can see it in the archaeology when you dig it, you can see where somebody's come along and actually dug a trench to rip out the stones to reuse them. So it's a good bet that that is the line of what was a stone wall before it had been taken out. Why they left that bit, who knows, but they did. They just left us one bit to really demonstrate that there had been a stone-built wall here. I mean, to be honest, it was rock solid. I mean, we took it to bits, and it was hard work because they knew how to build stuff, the Romans, got to give it to them. Very, 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 very well built indeed. We also found 3 of these things, and these were little furnaces, or fireplaces if you like, with a fire pit at the back and this big flue leading into the building. So taking all these bits of evidence together, this is looking very much like we have a Roman bathhouse, and it was, you know, it's looking pretty convincing. And yeah, keep cleaning and more comes to light until it was undisputably a Roman bathhouse.
Were they in situ?
Those were all in situ, yeah, they were, as they were laid in the early 2nd century. Incredible. We've actually got a bit of a plethora of archaeology going on here. Why aren't there any here? Well, the answer is that's actually a bell casting pit that was dug in the 17th century, cut through the Roman hypercourse, but left some of it, which is great because it's quite nice to look at 17th century archaeology as well. Shame they trashed the hypercourse doing it, but they left us a little bit. They left us enough to say, you know, oh, yeah, Roman hypercourse. Okay, so just a quick bit of explanation what we're talking about. That's like a dodgy drawing through Roman hypercourse. These are the peli stacks, these are the things we found, and they will have supported what would effectively a mortar floor, cement floor, raised floor. And the deal is, the furnaces you have pump in heat underneath that floor, underfloor heating. You know, I've been raving about it today. You think, oh gosh, you know, I've got underfloor heating. I'll try, oh, new. Well, not really. The Romans were doing it in the 1st century. So yeah, that's basically what the archaeology we were getting. We're right down below floor level, if you like. Hypercourse peli, bits of furnace, bits of the wall, but enough to say, undisputably, it's a Roman bathhouse. And there it is in its full glory. Try to sketch out the red lines mark the robber trenches with little bits of wall and the various rooms, which is pretty typical layout for a Roman bathhouse. One thing about the Romans that's great actually for archaeologists anyway is that they are, in some respects, a little bit predictable. They build roads in straight lines, which is great. They lay out the towns very, very precisely, mark things out. There are various different plans they have for bathhouses, in fairness, but this does conform to other known examples of bathhouses, which is really kind of handy and does fit really well. So we are able to reconstruct how it works a little bit. This is all below ground, but with a bit of imagination you can kind of reconstruct the above ground stuff. A few people have had a go, but my absolute favourite one is one that a guy called Dave Holland put together from Wigan Archaeological Society. I mean, it's amazing how he did it, but that was Dave's reconstruction of what the bathhouse might have looked like. And yeah, that's, you know, I think that's probably pretty accurate actually, to be honest. You might say, well, what on earth are what's all that arch roof thing? But the Romans did do that. That is Roman design. So I think that is probably quite accurate. I don't know about the hills, it'd be nice to have the River Douglas in, but it gives you an idea of what it might have looked like. I talked about bathhouse plans. Here's a few. A lot of the different bathhouses, these are mainly taken from known bathhouses up on Hadrian's Wall. But ours conforms very, very, very closely to that of Great Chester's. And it makes you wonder whether it's actually the same builders who did it. It's quite possible. A bathhouse building crew, it's quite possible. Moving north, next stop Hadrian's Wall, it's possible. So, that's bathhouse. I've talked about finds, yeah, we had loads of finds. Here's just a few of them. It's always good to look at finds. Pottery mainly. We always find pottery. As archaeologists, pottery we find more than anything. One of the main reasons for that is that pottery is indestructible. It doesn't rot. It's oblivious to different sorts of soil conditions. The soil conditions around here are actually quite acidic. So things like iron objects tend to corrode away quite quickly. You don't tend to get very good preservation of metalwork. Animal bones don't survive very well, but pottery, it's always there, indestructible. So, top left, who have we got? That's something called block burnished ware. Very, very, very typical 2nd century Roman kitchenwares, if you like. Comes in a variety of jars and jugs and bowls. All made down near Dorset actually, and shipped up by the Roman military. Standard kit. That's a fragment of what I would call a box flue. Now the box flues were set into the wall of the bathhouse, and they effectively acted as flues to let the heat and steam from the furnaces out to the atmosphere once they'd heated up the floor. So the vents, if you like. They're very clever the way they set them into the walls. Classic Roman Samian, that's your Roman finest pottery. Nearly all of it's produced in France and then shipped across by the Roman military for use of the Roman military. And you tend to find it on most Roman sites where there's been a military presence. It's always a really good indication that when you find a lot of Roman Samian, you're on a military site, because they're the only guys who have real access to it. It does get distributed to the local population, but not in any vast quantities. Another bit of black burnished ware at the bottom. That was a particularly nice and very rare vessel called the unguent pot. And they tended to be used for containing oils and ointments, and exactly the sort of thing you would find in a bathhouse, where the bathers are using bathing ointments. So it fits really, really, really quite nicely with the bathhouse. So there we go, we got a bathhouse. But it still leaves a lot quite unexplained. Why have we got a bathhouse and some ironworking hearts that were found at the Weed in the 80s? Where's the fort? Where's the Roman military living? Was there a fort here? Because really we have to have a fort for Wigan to be indisputably Coccium. It ain't going to be on the Roman Antonine itinerary. There's not going to be a named settlement, or it's very unlikely to be a named settlement without there having been a military fort there.
So even if you couldn't find a fort, wouldn't just having a hypocaust of such size tell you? I mean, they're not going to have a hypocaust in the middle of nowhere.
No, they're not going to have a bathhouse in the middle of nowhere. They're not. You're absolutely right but it does raise the question of what is the character of the town. Why is it so different to everywhere else in the northwest where we know there's Roman fort? I mean, all Roman forts, well not all, but most Roman forts will have a bathhouse associated with them. But you do sometimes get isolated ones connected to things called mancios, which are, I suppose the analogy is like a travel inn for official posts. They would stay in a mancio on their travels. So it might be this is a holiday inn on the Roman highway, put simplistically, and there just happens to be a load of metalwork going on at the same time. But that would be very unusual. That would be very unusual in the context of the Northwest. It's possible, but the evidence we have to hand at that time might suggest that. We're not looking at a fort at all. Who knows? But we need to alter that blooming red triangle saying site unknown, you know, and all the publications. We want to sort that out. Difficult to do without the firm evidence. Anyway, 2008, we get another bite at the cherry. Excellent. Because, sorry, finger happy on the keyboard. The Joint Service Centre. Excellent. Plans for that went in 2008. Re-excavate the weed effectively, and this did give us the opportunity to well, re-excavate the trenches that were done in the 1980s. Why do you want to do that? Well, the trenches that were done in the 1980s, we saw in those plans, it was like 4 trenches, well, a trench, a gap, another trench, a gap, another trench. We're going to do it again because we want to dig out those bits that weren't dug out before and join them all together and try and create this big plan, one single plan rather than loads of individual plans. Might well tell us something. And of course, we're also working in the light of what we found at the Grand Arcade. We do know the Wigan is something special in terms of the Roman occupation. We just don't know what, but it's certainly something special. So, fairly sizable excavation area to have a look at. Putting that into context, yeah, Grand Arcade, bathhouse down there, shipyard at the top, possible marching camp, whatever, there's some ditches, 1980s trenches, and a little bit more. That shows it quite nicely actually. We're not just re-excavating, we are actually getting some, you know, quite sizable additional areas, really to try and flesh out the story a little bit. Just maximising the opportunity, having a look at as much as we possibly can whilst we're there. Okay, we split it into really just for logistical purposes, because it's always a problem when you're digging big holes on a confined site. We can't turn Millgate into a spoil heap, but we have to dump all this material we're digging out somewhere. So we dig it in 2 halves. So top end, called Area 1, very imaginative. Started up there, found some great stuff. I had to put that, it's one of my favourite finds actually. Not Roman, 17th century, maybe early 18th century, but a really nice slipware dish. I love that sort of stuff. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful. And a really nice 17th century drinking cup, multi-handled, very typical 16th, 17th centuries, more likely 17th century. So yeah, we got some great gear out of it, but nothing Roman at all, which is a bit disappointing actually. Some great 19th century stuff as well. The site in the 19th century was part of Park's iron, it wasn't an iron works, it was like an iron merchants. So yeah, we got all that, we got some 18th century basements, really interesting stuff, but nothing Roman, which was a tad frustrating actually, to be honest, but that's the nature of it. Anyway, moving on to Area 2, a little bit further south, and we did start to find some stuff. Some of this had been re-excavated previously in the 1980s, but we opened up the areas that hadn't been looked at before, and we did start finding a few bits of Roman material, Roman pottery. Really small bits, scrappy bits. I mean, that's a 1 centimetre wide piece of Samian, really quite tiny. 2 centimetres, we're getting bigger. That's the rim of what we call a mortaria, which is like effectively a Roman pestle mortar. But very distinctive, the white colour. And some Roman orange wares, again, really small bits, but it's definitely Roman, you know. But the key thing was the features, as we call them, you know, what had been here, what's the evidence for any sort of buildings. And we did find 1 or 2 things. This is a plan of the purely Roman features, and you can see these like narrow little, well, features. Now they're very typical of what I would call a beam slot, where a timber beam has been laid horizontally into the ground as a sole plate for a timber building. It's a good chance we thought that's what they may be. So that was kind of a good result. On this plan, the grey areas are where the 1980s trenches had been, so we were finding the stuff in between. So the next stage really was to tie that into what had been found in the 1980s, put the drawings together basically. And I can't take any credit for this. I have to mention a guy called John Zant, who works for Oxford Archaeology. It was Oxford Archaeology who dug all this, you know, where I used to work. John put this together, and the guy is a genius. He took the plans we put together in 2008 with the plans from the Wind, and he found that they joined up, and these linear features actually linked in. So with a little bit of an imagination and actually joining the dots with a dashed line, he was actually able to create very convincingly the plan of a building. And that building plan corresponds pretty precisely to a Roman barrack block, which is the building that we find inside the Roman fort. So it was a bit of a eureka moment actually. The fort we've been looking for, we've been in the middle of it all the time. It's looking like it. So just putting that into a bit of context. There's our excavated barrack block, and that's exactly where you would expect to find it within the context of a Roman fort. The centre of the fort is dominated by what's called the headquarters building, made administrative centre if you like. The commander's office, boss military personnel in the middle, barrack blocks around the outside where soldiers live. And effectively, I think we got really convincing, definitive evidence for that bit of barrack block. And by association, we are in the Roman fort. What this did do actually is blew out the marching camp scenario a little bit actually, because every Roman fort is encompassed by a series of 2, if not 3, defensive ditches. Taking that plan of a Roman fort, which is very standard, good old Romans, really standard with the fort sizes, you can plot out where the ditches might have been. Oh, and they have to go through shipyard if you project them. So it actually looks like at the end of the day we'd found the Roman fort ditches up at shipyard, but just didn't go for the obvious conclusion at the time that we got a full fort. It was those tent pegs, they threw us off scent. But it ties in really, really, really well. And the other really good thing is that the bathhouse lies immediately outside the fort, which is exactly where you would expect it to be, by analogy with other sites, and the Romans are quite predictable.
Can I ask a question?
Please do.
You know, it said the tent pegs threw you off.
Yes.
Where would they have lived when they were building that? Would they not have lived in like some kind of tented accommodation?
They would, yes, they would. So they may well, the first thing they may well have done is actually dig the defensive ditches. So effectively this was a marching camp in some respects, but it was transformed into a full fort. We don't know how big that will have been. But yeah, no, that's exactly right, yeah, they would have been living in tents. Yeah, only option. On the basis of this plan, this barrack block really, and associated ditch, to my mind this is, use the word, go on, it doesn't come easily because I'm an archaeologist, but I'm going to say the word definitely. It's hard that. We are definitely in Coccium, to my mind. Based on that, I'm sorry, Blackroddians, I'm really sorry, Edgeworthians, but nah. Sorry, lads. Wigan is the true Coccium. There is a question as to the name, actually, Coccium. It's an odd name, and it's not easily translated, but it can be translated, or is translated, as either red rock, or red earth, or red something, which actually doesn't fit that easily with Wigan. Yes, we have red rock 2 miles up the road, don't we? Just beyond Sandish, and the rock is quite red, but in Wigan the rock ain't red.
There was an article in Past Forward
2013, yes.
2013.
Yeah, Brian, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Is Brian here by any chance? No. He makes some really interesting points in that. For anybody who hasn't read it, Brian was proposing that the name Coccium was drawn from a fairly major Roman pottery production place, producing red earthenware, and that continued post-Roman period, right up into the medieval period. It's a lovely thought, it really is a lovely thought. The only slight snag with it is there isn't a shred of evidence, I don't think. Now Brian did suggest that pottery, Roman pottery, was being produced in Wigan. It may well have been. It may well have been for a short period, but it did not become a major centre of pottery production during the Roman period, that's for certain. It's quite interesting actually. I mentioned before that we spent a bit of time, well a long time actually, digging up Walton-le-Dale. Now what we did find at Walton-le-Dale was a pottery kiln. It was intact, Roman pottery kiln, shed load of Roman pottery with it, which is really good. It's really useful from an archaeologist's point of view, because we can take that material, pour over the pottery, hang on to it, and then when we find another bit of pottery that's identical on another site in 5 years' time, say, oh look, it's Walton-le-Dale, that's where it was made. Really kind of useful. Although that is very much a simplification, because what the specialists who looked at the Walton-le-Dale pottery concluded was that actually it's incredibly similar to the pottery that was made in the known kilns at Wilderspool in Warrington. And what was suggested is that as the Roman military moved north, all their supply systems moved north with them. So all the guys are making the ironwork for them, they move with the military. The guys are making pottery for them, move north. Or it might well be a son or a relation of the Wilderspool potters was actually practicing their family skills up at Walton-le-Dale, producing the same gear. Given that Wigan is halfway between Wilderspool and Walton-le-Dale, it's entirely possible that the skills from Wilderspool were transferred to Wigan, and there was pottery manufacture going on here, but it didn't last, not to the extent that Brian suggests. Sorry, lovely thought, but I don't really buy it. We do know that there was a reasonably important pottery industry in Wigan during the medieval period, and we know that from documentary references. They're a little bit oblique, but they do mention about potters and people getting into arguments with landowners and mine workings, etc.
Ian, did you find a medieval kiln in
Oh, yeah, we did. We did, yeah, Bill's exactly right, actually. We did find a kiln during the work at Joint Service Centre 2008. It wasn't a pottery kiln. I'm not entirely sure what it was actually. I'm an archaeologist, I'll just say possibly. The jury came out to say it was probably for drying grain. That was based on quite a bit of charred grain that was found around it, so it would kind of make sense. That seems to date to the 15th century based on the pottery, if I remember rightly. But yeah, it wasn't a pot kiln.
Ian, just to come back to the red thing.
Oh yes.
That's one translation of Coccium, I think, is a red tree or a red berry tree.
Right.
I read that sometimes Roman names were drawn from the sort of Celtic origin, the Celtic name for a place. So what red berried tree has a Celtic association with
Wigan tree.
the Wigan tree or the Wigan tree?
Ah.
Celtic name for a rose.
That's an interesting suggestion, isn't that an interesting suggestion? Yeah, brilliant.
Will you repeat the question? I didn't get it.
How do you translate Coccium? What does it mean from the Latin?
Yeah.
It's just been suggested it could be from the red berry tree rather than, I've always thought rock.
Yeah.
But yeah, of course. Brilliant suggestion. Because the rock in Wigan town ain't red. As we know from the bathhouse, the stone used in that was which finer grain, kind of creamy colour sandstone, which does tie in with this slight reconstruction drawing we got here. So what I've tried to put together here is the morphology of Coccium. There's our Roman fort with our barrack block, our bathhouse just outside, overlooking that strategic crossing point of the River Duggy, from where the water wasn't drawn actually. Don't want to get into that. What I've done here is shade an area in green. That is total guesswork, but what that is supposed to represent is the possible extent of the settlement associated with the fort. Whenever you get a fort established, you get what's called the vicus that develops slightly later. That's the civilian settlement associated with a fort. So the fort houses the military, the vicus houses the military, soldiers' families. That's where the town is effectively. All the services that the military need, the soldiers need, all their families, they're not allowed in the fort, families live in the settlement. So we're taking a guess at the extent of where it might be. We still need to prove a lot of this, but it's a reasonable guess. I've got an area down here in red. Now, one thing I didn't mention, I should have done, is that going right back to the 1980s, yes, we did the trenches in the wings, but there was also some trenches done down by the gasworks, the former gasworks on Darlington Street. And whilst they didn't find terribly much there, there is records of human remains being found in association with Roman pottery. So the implication is that's the Roman cemetery. And that would be, again, the perfect position for it, because by stature, all burials were outside the formal settlements during the Roman period. That's where the dead were buried. They don't bury them within the boundary of the settlement, which is why we've terminated the settlement, the extent of the settlement down here. So it's not extending into that cemetery. That does kind of make sense. We've got all the finds that were found in the 18th and 19th century along King Street. So that again would be a good sign that we're well and truly within the vicus around that area. To my mind, what's the big unknown is what happened to the north. How far does it extend to the north? We've got no idea, to be honest. But I'm hopeful we might find out one day. I don't want to get controversial here, but I've got to be honest, I was a little bit surprised now then, it's only, well, 4 months ago maybe, when a planning application passed my desk. Yeah, I was surprised to hear that the galleries was going to be torn down. I was quite shocked really. But as you all know, the galleries is going and it's going to get redeveloped. So, quite sad about that really. But another part of me thought, yes! Our chance! What we do know is that much of the galleries has a massive big basement, right down the middle, which was done in the 1980s, really before archaeology was a requirement. I mean, archaeology has been a requirement really since, well, I suppose it was the late 70s, but not strong enough, not powerful enough a force in the planning system to do much work when the galleries was built. So yeah, big basement across most of it, but around the edges, this is where careful desk space assessment work comes in, very careful analysis of what has been done compared with what might have been there. That has shown that there might well be little islands of stratigraphy, intact stuff, so like might be. The only way to find out is to dig a big hole. But we're going to dig it. We're going to have a look. We're going to have a look. And to be honest, you only need a little bit. Just need, I don't know, 5 metres will do. Just with some real potting. Bearing in mind that that bathhouse possibly wouldn't have been found if we hadn't had that one little bit of Roman pot in the backfill of that half furnace. But that was enough. Romans here, they had been here. I'd love to find some under the galleries, because then we can actually either extend that creed line or if necessary rub it out. We just want to know, you know, how big was the Roman settlement, because we don't know at the moment.
Can you not put a stop to it before you do it?
No. I ain't that powerful. All I can do is just bleat about doing some archaeology work.
You get a lot of support.
Yeah, it's a surprising one actually, it was a surprising one.
Yes, I don't mean to rail on parade, but I'm very much don't find anything under the galleries. I worked on it many years ago, and the excavation was quite deep.
Yeah,
really
right down.
Right down. However, we do have the Millgate Centre coming down. The civic centre there, which is on your footprint, you know, which in the initial slides that you showed us there. So the Millgate Centre may have a better opportunity. But never forget there is I don't know if it's virgin land, not a virgin land. At the back of the John Bull there, there's an area there that's probably never been had a look at. I mean, a friend of mine had a shop there, and she was on Millgate, she'd just been telling me and invited Wigan.
2000, we drove down to in it. There was loads of trenches parts, and we called naturally. It was in heritage, and they looked and said, "Oh, it's nothing." But that work was too bit before it was started, and it was straight opposite the Bishop Inn.
Really? Oh man. Because that's pride position, that's the highest point in Wigan, isn't it, effectively? Top of the hill, which would be the focus of the settlement.
Well, the back of it backs out onto the John courtyard.
Yes, yeah.
Where the fortress was, and that,
Oh wow.
Well, the Millgate Centre is coming down, so that might be.
2 more bites of the cherry, maybe. Oh. I'm sure you're right about the galleries
Is it not listed that?
being trashed, but I still live in hope there might be just a little bit. I just want a little bit. But we'll find out in due course. We will find out. Okay, so no slight embarrassment really, I guess. Final slide actually, final slide. this stuff really needs to be in the public domain, you know, it needs to be in the public domain, it needs to be shouted about, it needs to be shouted about. Back in 2010, Bill and I put together a booklet on what we found on the Roman stuff. I mean, Bill managed to get a grant, it was fantastic to do that. So very grateful for getting a booklet out, quick overview really of what had been found, plus a lot of the important work you've done on the Roman roads into Wigan, which is key actually, really key to identifying Wigan as such an important place on the Roman road network, you know, it's a bit of a nodal point. What's really needed though is a full, proper, published account of everything we found. And frustratingly, that is 80% written. One day, hopefully, it will come out. But this is one of the real problems of archaeology, it can be a problem with archaeology, is that everything is funded by a developer. It was the last thing Margaret Thatcher did in power actually, the very last bit of legislation she passed was to privatise archaeology, developer pays principle. Prior to that, archaeology was effectively going with a begging bowl and said, would you fund a bit of archaeology? Well, go on, it's really important, go on, please, we have some cash to do this, which is why very little was done. Margaret Thatcher actually put it into the planning system. Right, yeah, and so the polluter pays principle, so the developer is actually liable. You're trashing it, you pay for it to be recorded, and you pay for it to be disseminated, which, okay, fair enough. But there isn't any way of stopping some scenarios that put paid to that, and the Grand Arcade is actually an example of it. So, the Grand Arcade was put together by a company, Modus Properties, brackets, Wigan Limited, who went into liquidation pretty much before the Grand Arcade was actually opened. Modus Properties are still around, but Modus Properties Wigan Limited aren't. And it was Modus Properties Wigan Limited that paid for this, or rather, didn't pay for that, because they were no longer around by the time we got to it. So consequently, there was never a budget to actually see that through all the way to full publication. But I'm determined to find some cash to actually finish that off. And I can't believe it's 17 years on and we've still not done it. But, one day that will appear. We've got front cover and we've got 80% of the words to go with it as well. So bear with me, and one day we might see that come to fruition.
Where's that column?
That's it, as found, the stone column.
Where is it now?
Oh, that's in the Museum of Wigan Life. Where's the history shop?
It's there at the moment.
Oh, isn't it?
They've just ripped a lot of the exhibition out and got a big rugby exhibition in. But I've not actually seen what they've taken out and what they've left in.
Oh, okay.
So it might be there, with the gold coins. Oh, in the store, yeah.
In storage.
It's being stored.
Yeah, in storage somewhere, so it'll get lost, like a lot of the stuff that gets lost in
Everything we dug up all went to the museum, yeah. I mean, they did have a really good display for a while.
Oh, yeah.
Sorry to her it's been taken down.
I don't know what's, like I said, I finished a few years ago from the museum, but I do know they've just put in this rugby exhibition and taken a lot of the stuff out that was there before.
Yeah.
But I've not seen it because it only opened about a month ago.
Right.
So I don't know what's in and what's out.
Did some of the material, was some of the material actually used in the reconstruction of that?
Yes, okay, so one thing we did get out, thanks for reminding me about that, probably as you've seen it around the back of the Grand Arcade is the reconstructed, of course, yeah, great. Most of the material used in that is Roman stuff. The smaller tiles are anyway. On the top we've got some bigger ones, sort of representing the floor. That we did get those manufactured because we didn't find any of those. But the actual pilar themselves are, yeah, Pucker Roman. It's not quite in its original position, but it's within about 50 metres of its original location. I mean, the original idea was to landscape all that land and put a bit more interpretation in, and there was talk at one stage around a Roman garden there, sort of growing Roman herbs and things like that. But whether that'll come to fruition or not in the future, I don't know. It's good to get the hypercourse, but it does seem a little bit lost with the backdrop of the Grand Arcade, a little bit, but better than nothing.
Just one point on where the majority, probably 90% of it in the bathhouse is located, it's actually in a warehouse for hints. I've actually seen it, I think there might be potential opportunity where we could perhaps get a visit to it. So about 90 it's in crates. I mean, I've seen it, everything that you excavated is in the warehouses at hints. So I don't know about the column, I know they said where that column. But nearly everything's in our storage facility.
Right. With these, I mean, we collected and saved every Roman tile basically. I think we had 1.1 tonne of that material, and didn't really know what to do with it, to be honest. So it was looked at by somebody who specialises in Roman tiles, and there is such a person, believe me. He loved it. But once he'd done his job, we passed it all over to the museums, and there's a lot of it here. So last I saw, to be honest, is that it went into a container on Frog Lane. But this is going back 15 years. So I imagine it's probably been moved to Lynch from there. A lot of that will be this stuff. And the question is, what do you do with all of it here, really? It's not got too much of a display potential. Some, yes, but 1.1 tonnes. I mean, it's the ideal material, really, for schools, etc., to use for, I don't know, educational purposes or whatever. But who knows? I haven't got any more slides, but I'd love to chat about it if anybody's got questions. I can see hands going up all over the place. Good. Sure.
Is there any idea now about where the road fits into that?
Nope.
The road?
Yeah, no. What we suspect is more or less down Millgate. That's what we're guessing. Millgate, we suspect it's probably the line of the Roman road, or maybe between Millgate and King Street, but we don't know for certain. I have got my eye on just to the south of the Grand Arcade. There is that vacant plot. Somebody's going to build on that sooner or later, surely. That would certainly be worth looking at, just in case we can clip the road. Because it'd be lovely to know. It would be lovely to know, because we don't know.
You don't know north and south of Wigan?
Nope.
Where it is?
Nope. Bill's the person to ask here. We found it at Standish, haven't we, basically?
Yeah, we dug in Brimwell Farm, back in there. The antiquarian, Watkin, and previous to it, Simpson, traced it out of Wigan, going up roughly crossing Buckley Street, where the railway crosses it, where the factory used to be. Presumably following Dickinson Terrace. Well, that makes sense. That's past the north of it. And it's shown on the first station west on that route going out.
Following the A49 route now?
No.
Or further west?
Yeah.
Through Brimwell Farm?
Yeah, going, like I said, crossing Buckley Street, north of Wigan Park, where Rival's factory is now. Going off that way. We've not been able to prove any of that, except at Brimwell Farm. That's the only place where we've been able to.
Wouldn't you be likely to follow that in a straight line, but wouldn't be likely to follow, because there's two ridges that go north, one green lane.
Well, that was,
which is not far from Brimlow Farm, when you put straight across the field. And you can also see a long way to the west of that, or you've got the A49, where you've got a valley. It's got screens.
a lot of people look for Standishwood Lane, which is quite strange.
That's not an Standishwood
Yeah,
Lane.
no, you can say Green Lane further up.
No, it's Standishwood Lane.
Yeah, we have investigated where it disappears around Lowood Ford area. Done resistivity surveys, but we've not found any evidence that it continued. And also, Standishwood Lane is a huge hollow way, which is not what the roads used to do. They didn't build hollow ways except where they needed them, going into a ravine. It's more likely to be medieval because you've got medieval crosses.
Yeah, you got that cross that where,
The other big thing about that route, why people have gone for it, is because it's on the major alignment going north-south from Warrington up to Almerdale, and Wigan is sort of off the main route to the east. But this is another theory about long-distance alignments.
Yes. Yeah.
Where the Romans would mark these long-distance alignments out, but then would deviate from them to achieve wherever they wanted to go, or to avoid
swamps,
obstacles.
To get across Wigan, like you said, the ford now, that's why the river stops being a youthful river and turns into marsh green, swamp meadow, which are going to be very marshy to go around.
I mean, Simpson were quite convinced that the road turned into Wigan as it came up through Ashton, Bryn and Bruce Green. Then instead of going straight across towards Marshall Mill, it turned into Wigan, crossing the Dagenham Bridge. He was quite certain of that, but he was talking in the 1830s.
So probably had more traces of where the old roads were, really.
Exactly.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. It's incredible reading some of there's some stuff from the 18th and early 19th centuries when they're describing this stuff, you know. You actually see it, you can see it as an agate, raised thing, really clear on the ground.
Some clever rights.
We've lost it. Yeah.
The thing is, with all the industrialisation, you can't even plot the actual course of the Douglas.
No, that's right.
The big canals and butcher.
Yes.
You know, so with first of all canals, then the railways.
Yes.
You know, within central.
That's not the actual current course. That's the course that we think it was. A couple of the we did the initial evaluation trenches. Some of those were placed down here specifically to try and locate the original course of the river, which we kind of did, but it was a long way down. You know, we got about 4 metres and something that looked a little bit like river silts, but.
I looked in Crompton Street, and that's more or less. It goes into scope more or less where the mountain was built for Wigan Central Station, and there's a little spiritualist church, and that was built on the original riverbed. You walk past the top window. It sloped down about 10 feet, and then in Debenhams loading there was the actual stone wall of the Douglas Bridge.
Wow.
And
yes.
that was adjacent to it, you know, so it proved it was on the riverbed. And we had to move from that place. It was SNS Motors originally, and they wanted to extend the stores, and they had a survey done, and there was a riverbed and coal seam underneath the stores. So they sold up, and it ended up being rebuilt as a supermarket, but it cost a fortune for the piling.
Oh, what the? Is that Tesco's?
No, that was Co-op. It's now a bingo hall. It's in Crompton Street.
Ah, right. Yeah.
So,
and
it's where it went through then, because it diverted all the way around Stock, hasn't it now?
Yeah.
Canalised and
it's
I remember when the excavations were carried on in 2005, they actually put some trenches on the car park next to the cinema.
Yes, we did. Yes.
Trying to find the riverbed.
Yes.
They couldn't, it was such a steep
Deep.
wall.
Yeah.
It was all colliery spoil that they built up to create the environment for the central station. And that's the car park where that, I've walked over many a time, to get into Wigan, from schools, that's the route into Wigan. It was you're thinking that's an original embankment, that's not, it's just all artificial.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, if the town, let's just say it was large, even larger than that possibly, I'm not quite sure. Could you explain how far the Roman influence would go into the surrounding countryside? 'Cause like down south, you find villas in the middle of nowhere. Would that have happened up north? Or was there a little military outpost surrounded by savages?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there's very little evidence to be definitive, but my personal view is that they're very well integrated and their influence spread right across the region. We don't get the villas up here. We don't have the same situation as we do down south, and I think that really reflects the fact that it was very sparsely populated up here, and remained sparsely populated until the 17th century, the 18th century, because so much of it was swamp and forest basically, isn't it? But yeah, no, very well integrated. We can tell that from some of the archaeology work that's been done. Where I'm trying to think of examples, certainly a good example in Lancaster, possibly a good example just outside Preston at Cured, where we had a site where we found what were probably roundhouses, which is the typical sort of dwelling but for Iron Age and earlier peoples. But see that tradition continuing into the Romano-British period when the Romans are here. They've got Roman pot. And the fact that they've got Roman pot says they are trading with their Roman overlords or rulers or whatever you want to call it. There's no evidence either way really.
So they could have been farming, say, up the river, up the valley sides there, etc., supplying the town.
Yeah, absolutely. It's to everyone's benefit. The local indigenous population can get loads out of these guys because they are bringing all sorts of really good technology with them. Infrastructure, roads. What do the Romans ever do for us? Well, they do loads of things.
So you find a road and it may not necessarily be the only road. It could be, or do they only build a road to a certain standard that's going to go a long way? Or could there be a road up along Brimlaw Farm? Could there be another road heading towards Blackrock? Could there be a sub-fort at Blackrock? From a larger centre.
Don't give them any ground. a road heading east, quite possibly. There's certainly a road to Manchester from Wigan. We've got that. Within our classical sites found it. Found it in a few places now.
We excavated that Anzul Common. Got some indications of it. It's been a very difficult road to find actually. As I say, areas work has turned up.
But coming back to your point, this is quite partially answers your point actually, in that from what we've seen from archaeology, the main north-south route from Warrington, further south, Warrington, Wigan, Walton-le-Dale, that was like, I suspect that was the main north-south highway. And what we've seen is that is a big, wide road, very, very, very well built, generally 7 metres wide. Whereas where we've seen the Manchester to Wigan road, it's not quite as well built. We've only seen it in a couple of places, but it's a bit narrower. I don't know, we haven't seen enough to be definitive, but does that suggest there are different types of road? Your main highway and...
There's the Roman road at Darwin, it was called the Roman road. Has that road been found?
That's my knowledge. There's all sorts of things that are called Roman way, Roman this, Roman that.
Yeah.
Sometimes the evidence isn't quite as good. One interesting thing we really had when we dug at Millgate, which is on the main Roman road, really fragmentary survival and have been ploughed out for the most part, but nevertheless, definitely the Roman road. The way the Romans used to do it, really amazing road builders, is they would build something called an agger, which is like a slightly raised bank. And they do that by digging ditches along the side. So you dig your drainage ditches, your spoil goes into the middle, create a bit of a raised bank, and then put your stone capping on top of that, various grades, sort of a foundation bed of big slabs, and then finer stone as you go to the top. Top is rammed gravel. So we did find the drainage ditches, well, the road and the drainage ditches at Landgate. But what was fascinating about that site is that obviously the ditches get infilled over time. So we dig them out and we could see very clearly that those ditches had been dug in the Roman period, we had a bit of Roman pot. They'd filled in a little bit just through natural soil accumulation, and then were recut in the medieval period, and we got medieval pot out of it, several bits of medieval pot. So the implication is that that road was built by the Romans, and it might well have been on a pre-existing track used by the Iron Age people. That's certainly possible. I've seen that elsewhere, where the Romans are just formalising the existing route. But the fact we were getting medieval pot out of it, I'd like to think that that suggests that the road actually remained in use for 1,000 years as a routeway. Okay, it might have become a little bit overgrown, but it was certainly in use if they go to the trouble of digging out the drainage ditches again. And yeah, there's pottery in there, so definitely medieval days, which I thought was quite fascinating. So coming back to your question, yeah, I think that works both ways, and I think there's little doubt that the Romans were formalising existing infrastructure, what there was, but that infrastructure was not like a proper Roman road. It would have been a track, you know.
But then from Wigan, you know, they got that Roman settlement that they fought at Scaresbury. I mean, why is that there? Is it because there's the big swamp there? Is it a food harvesting station? Is that where they get the garum from? Is that shipped up to Douglas, hauled up to Douglas to Wigan and then sent north and south?
Possibly.
Why is it there in the middle of the swamp? On the high ground, we're in the biggest lake in northern England at the time.
Yeah, and not that far distance from the coast. So again, you know, is that a security thing for the coast? One thing, oh God, I'm just flying kites now, but one thing I'm really quite keen on is what I'd love to know more about is just how much use did the Romans make of boats and water transport. Personally, I think they made loads of use of it. You know, the traditional vision is that you get these squads of Roman army marching up and down the country under Agricola. Well, yeah, maybe, but I think it was a previous governor with his fleet of boats who actually deserves a lot more credit than he gets. And I don't know, this is a really ridiculous flying a kite, but is that navigable to the sea? Sorry, was that navigable to the sea?
I think with a skiff you could drag shallow stuff up there and maybe one or two thin rapids around where it goes through Gaffer's Gap. The rest of it's flat and marching. Whether you sail anything up, they had to build locks to get it navigable in the 1700s, early 1700s. Well, that's for bigger boats. Well, could you get light skiffs up? Why not?
And that's certainly what I think. I personally, you know, again, it's just me, but personally I think that's the whole rationale behind Walking the Dale. So the confluence of the River Ribble, the River Darwen, and the Ribble at that point is tidal. And to me it's just the obvious answer. Roman, you know, those are proper coastal boats coming in, unloading at Walking the Dale, sailing around with gay abandon and transshipping onto smaller boats up the river to Ribchester, which again is tidal up that far. And it would kind of make sense if they actually utilise that. Another quite intriguing thing is Tesco's, big Tesco's, that's on the side of a quarry. I'm on thin ice here, somebody's going to correct me, I know, but we'll go for it anyway. That's on the side of a quarry. Is that the source of the stone that was used in the bathhouse is the right sort of stone. And
questions actually, where did they get the stone from?
well, I'd like to suggest that it came from a quarry underneath Tesco's, right by the river. That'd be a really easy way of transporting it down, not very far, I know, but I thought.
I think you concluded that the Romans left Wigan around what, 40 AD. Was that the conclusion? I think that
We don't know. We don't know when they left.
Did they get some evidence from the firing of the stokeholes? This archaeothermal.
We did get a date. We got a date that said that firmly showed that the bathhouse was in use during the 2nd century. It did seem to go out of use by the end of the 2nd century. It wasn't particularly long-lived. There was a suggestion that it might have been dismantled and moved further north. Don't really know what the evidence for that is. The end of the Roman occupation right across the northwest is a really sketchy one. We don't know. They were lurking around till the early 5th century, but finding bits of pottery or any sort of physical remains from that, well, even the 4th century, it's really quite rare. If there was anyone still living here, it would have been a very small population, nothing like what it was. What we do tend to get, and I suspect it was the same in Wigan, but again I don't think we got the real evidence for it, but in most of the other towns in the northwest, what we do see is a temporary abandonment in the mid-1st century when everyone gets on a happy bus to go and give the Scots a really hard time. And we've seen that in Lancaster, we've seen that in Manchester, we've seen that several places where these forts actually get abandoned for a short period and then get reoccupied and often rebuilt towards the end of the 2nd century. But again, they can't really say that about Wigan, not just yet. We need to dig some more holes yet, as and when we get that chance one day, soon, hopefully.
Was there a theory put forward that it could have been built, the bathhouse could have been built for Emperor Hadrian's visit to the wall because it ties in?
It's a nice thought, isn't it? I'm not going to pour water on that one. Adrian was here. We'll never know, but it's possible. Yes, it's the right period. We can say that it's the right period.
It's just wild for conjecture, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, the chances are he did go visit the wall. There's a good chance he went up the main north-south highway. Well, that's a nice thought, isn't it?
So is there nothing between, really, what's the earliest medieval? Because there's no Saxon, is there?
Not to our knowledge.
No Saxon, so the people who are living here would presumably be a continuation of the Iron Age people.
Oh, if only we knew the answer to that question.
Because there seems to be a big gap between the Roman and then Wigan becomes an important medieval town in 1200, doesn't it?
It does.
But how far back from the 1200s can we go?
We can't. Hence the term Dark Ages, not because the sun didn't come out, but because we know nothing about it. And it's really frustrating. But I think the finds we have from pre-conquest, i.e. Norman conquest, 1066, from the 5th century to then, right across the northwest, there is the number of sites we know about, you can count on the fingers of one hand.
So you found nothing at all when you did that was in that period?
No, not from Wigan, not to my knowledge. I'm not forgetting anything obvious on that. No, it is not unusual. We just don't. It's right across the northwest. Very little. Don't know why. I mean, it doesn't help. We do suspect that a lot of technology was forgotten, including possibly how to make pottery. Might not forgotten, but there was a preference for using other materials, organic materials, wooden drinking vessels, eating vessels, which rot completely, you don't find them. Metal drinking vessels that can just rot and disappear. But we just don't find it. So was it just so sparsely populated, which is quite possible, to be honest, there just wasn't the people here. We don't know whether that's a genuine or not.
We do have the place names
Place names, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Which date from
Early
the period.
English.
So
Yeah,
it does give you an indication that there was people living
yeah.
in this area.
Yeah, Ashton and Makefield's a good example of that, really, isn't it? And, well, there's numerous ones, really, where you could point to early pre-conquest name evidence.
So the Vikings to the west of Lancashire.
Got Viking stuff all over the place on the coast, around the Wirral and bits of the west coast, but whether they penetrated far, well, it doesn't look like they came very far inland on this side, as far as we can tell.
There was a big settlement, wasn't there, in 902 when the Norwegians got kicked out of Dublin.
Ah, yes, the infamous battle, we don't know where it was.
No, not that one. You're on about Bromber with that one.
Yes. Yes.
They were forced out of Dublin and they landed, I think it was Professor Harding who did the study the blood of the Vikings, chasing the DNA and...
right, okay.
It seems that there was a full evacuation of Dublin by the Norwegians and they settled in the Wirral and the Liverpool Bay area. So
that makes sense.
There's lots of Viking names all in there.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, certainly around there. Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yes, and not the whole northwest. No, just this bit of the northwest. Yes.
Is there any genetic evidence of the influence that the Romans had on the local population to give an idea of how many there were here or the population?
I don't think there's any, I'm sure there's no evidence for it. It would be a really interesting study, but nobody's ever taken it on, to my knowledge. There's still so much to find out, isn't there? It's always, yeah. Sometimes I wonder, oh God, am I going to get unemployed one day? Are we going to run out of archaeology? But no, we're not. I think really that's really exemplified by the recent discovery of the fort at Berska. I'm sure you're aware of that. Are we? So a fort was recently, a whole Roman fort was recently, within the last 10 years, been discovered out just outside Berska. And I find that absolutely remarkable that when you just discovered this, how can that happen? But it did.
Which side of Berska was that?
I'm not entirely sure actually.
Towards Holmeswood, near the Douglas.
The fort at Berska, it's about 4.5 acres. It's almost twice the size of the Northern Castle shop. So it is quite a big fort.
Proper thing.
Not quite as big as Winchester.
No question, which side of Berska it's on?
Just to the southeast, southwest of Berska town centre. So, the
So near to
59.
yeah, and then down to
Between Rockford and Ormscott. It's just off that road.
I had to doctor this map actually. Oh God, that's terrible, isn't it? I had to dot that on quite rapidly actually, that road line off to Berska, because that doesn't appear, if you look at any publications pre sort of 10 years ago, they won't show that because we just found it. But it's quite, I'm glad to mention that because that does show actually, I mean we're assuming a road went from Wigan West, but it's a fair assumption. But that does show quite nicely what a nodal point Wigan was on the transport system. And that's important because that really will give the place even more significance as this kind of crossroads of the main routes. I think, yeah, actually the one with Berska is really quite important. You just got to find that one though.
The things he's found here, he thinks it goes up Ormscott Road through Pemberton and Poland, and then on to the Ashes Beacon hill, and then down through Leyland. But I'm not convinced. It's not a straight route. and it's quite a difficult route going on the top of Ashes Peak. It seems to me more sensible to go down the Douglas Valley or maybe over Barrow.
Any more questions, or am I off the hook?
We're getting that time as well, you know. You say you were worried that you'd make express an hour. Could everybody give a big answer? It was an absolutely fascinating talk. I think it was more in depth than the one that where we were at Wigan. I think we were there a lot longer, but I found this a lot more interesting. I think it was smashing. I think it'll tickle everybody's interest in Roman Wigan even further. And probably everybody will be claiming they found bits of Roman, this, that and the other.
Which is out there.
I already think I found something, but so yes, great. Thanks very much again. That was amazing.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah.
Genuinely, thank you very much, because I find it frustrating that book is not out, you know, and it's really good for me personally just to share it, you know. We found all this really exciting stuff, and not enough people know about it. So thanks for listening.